Pete, thank you for calling in. You added Exxon calls and you're buying TransOcean calls. Can you tell me about them?
Yeah, it's pretty interesting, Scott. I was just trimming yesterday a lot of this different energy exposure that we had just because the move has been so violent to the upside. But I couldn't help myself today as I saw more options coming back in. ExxonMobil was one of those that they were buying this week's 90 calls and this week's 89 calls. They bought 10,000 of the 90s, 4,000 of the 89 calls. So that definitely grabbed my attention. Now, that was before we had this little bit of a pullback that we are seeing now, but we all know how quickly things can move in the markets that we're in right now. I mean, these velocity moves are just absolutely unbelievable intraday. TransOcean was another one. By the way, we had 11 energy hits on the unusual options activity today in the first 90 minutes of trade, just to give you a little perspective of how active this sector has been. But in TransOcean, we also had buyers. They went all the way out to January, Scott, which is something we haven't been seeing. We have had some April calls bought today, as well as these January calls. So that's going out multiple months. That's going out further into the future than we normally would see. But that was the January 10 calls. And then in the global clean energy ETF, that continues to move to the upside. ICLN, don't talk about this one a lot, don't see a lot of activity until yesterday we had a buyer of 25,000 of the June 25 calls. Today we've got a buyer of 4,000 of the December 25 calls. So seeing a lot of activity in there as well as some of those that are in the solar space, but they're smaller names. I can't bring them up. I'm not going to bring them up.
I got you.
This ETF is very indicative of what we're seeing across that space.
Pete, our conversation is probably a little bit different than it would have been 10 minutes ago, in that this trade, more than any other, you could make an argument, is most susceptible to headline risk, that being the energy trade, just given how these stocks have run so much. So when you're playing it on such a short-term basis, you even assume more risk in those kind of headlines, which cause a chart like the one you're seeing, not only in crude, but as you talked about, Exxon and rig, similar movements. They all look the same.
Yeah, that's why right now I think, and I've talked with you about this just last week, Scott, when I was on with you, but I said this is an unbelievable trading market. And I mean that because investing is very difficult right now. We've had a lot of people who are calling bottoms, and yet we've gone down yesterday another 800 points. We added to it Friday. But, you know, I think as far as the options world, yes, right away, all of a sudden these are right in your face. You're wrong, and the stock moves down a little bit. We all know that by the end of the day, we have no idea, but we might see a little bit of a rebound back with this price of crude that actually would start to lift some of these names once again. But, you know, that's the markets that we're in right now. That's the volatility that we're dealing with right now, the intraday volatility that's just been extraordinary. It continues. But the energy space, and I always want to qualify this too, Scott, and I'm seeing that crude's going back up a little bit again now. I see it, I'm showing it up back towards close to 124. But as I'm watching this, by the end of the day, we could be almost anywhere. We could be at 120. We could be at 130. That's the kind of market that we're in right now, which does create a bit of a trading market for sure, but very, very difficult for the longer-term investor because you're seeing all of this right in front of you, and it's something that does, I think, affect your psyche as you're looking at this from that perspective.